I want you to try something for me. Right now, wherever you are, whether you're commuting or folding laundry or just kind of staring at the ceiling. Just for a moment, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to visualize a scene.
Okay.
It's quiet, early morning. The air is crisp. And you're walking past this shallow pond. It's maybe knee-deep, muddy, really stagnant. You're the only person around. Total silence.
Right. And then into that silence, you hear splashing.
Exactly. You look over and your heart just stops. There is a small child in the water. Face down, flailing, clearly drowning. There is no one else, just you. But, and here's the variable, you are wearing a suit.
Right.
And not just any suit. This is bespoke, brand new, imported Italian silk. It cost you, let's say, $5,000, maybe more. It represents a solid month of hard labor. It is the nicest thing you own.
So the stakes here are material wealth versus human life. It's the classic setup.
It is. You know with absolute certainty that if you wade in to grab that child, the mud is going to ruin the suit. It's destroyed. $5,000 gone in a second. But
Yeah.
the child lives.
This is Peter Singer's famous thought experiment, right? The drowning child.
It is. But forget Singer for a second. I want to ask you, the listener, what do you do? Do you hesitate? Do you pull out a calculator and weigh the amortization of the suit against the future economic output of the toddler? Do you think about the dry cleaning bill?
Of course not. It's completely visceral. You jump in. You don't even think.
You jump in. Almost everyone says yes instantly to this. If you stood on the bank watching a child die because you didn't want to stain your cuffs, we wouldn't just think you were rude. We wouldn't just think you were cheap. We would think you were a monster.
We would classify that by almost any standard as objectively wrong.
Right. But here is the empiricist's challenge. And this is where the floor kind of starts to drop out from under us. That feeling you have, that instant gut-level nauseating drive to do the right thing, is it real?
Well, I guess we have to define real, because the feeling itself is certainly real.
I mean, does it connect to anything outside of you? Is it a connection to a higher truth? Is it a cosmic law, like gravity? Or, and this is the provocation, is it just a survival hack? Is your sense of right and wrong merely a biological trick, just a firing of neurons designed by evolution to keep the tribe from killing each other so your genes can survive?
That is the cold water of materialist philosophy right there. It suggests that the voice of conscience isn't some phone line to the divine. It's just a utilitarian delusion, a biological illusion that tricks us into cooperating because, historically, the cooperators survived and the loners got eaten by leopards.
It's like a rhythmic, pulsing background noise, a biological heartbeat just keeping the organism alive. And if that's true, then good isn't real. It's just useful. Good is just a flavor of advantageous. But today we're going to push back against that. We're going to look at the rationalist's counter. Because if you think morality is just biology, you walk right into a logical buzzsaw.
The Euthyphro Dilemma.
The Euthyphro Dilemma. It sounds like a dusty old philosophy term, doesn't it? Like something you sleep through in a 101 class.
Yeah, it really does.
But it's not. It is a logic gate. It's a cerebral puzzle that has trapped thinkers for 2,000 years. It challenges the very idea of where goodness actually comes from.
And that's really the narrative arc of our journey today. We are moving from the shifting sands of cultural relativism, where right and wrong change with the wind, to what our source calls the bedrock of architectural justice.
Yes. And speaking of the source, our guide for this deep dive is a text called The Quranic Moral Argument. It's a chapter from the book The Quran and Atheism by J.R. Ahmed.
It's a fascinating text to dig into because it doesn't shy away from these modern arguments. It takes these very sharp atheist critiques, evolutionary biology, the problem of relativism, and it faces them head on. It deconstructs the idea that morality is just a biological illusion and reconstructs it as the functional architecture of the soul.
Functional architecture. That phrase really stuck with me when I was reading through the source material. It implies design. It implies that being good isn't just a rule you follow to avoid getting in trouble. It's the way you are built to operate, like putting the right fuel in an engine. So let's unpack this. What is the actual mission of this deep dive?
The mission is to find the compass. We are going to look at why we feel this pull toward justice, why we agree that some things are undeniably wrong, and whether we can logically justify that feeling without a transcendent anchor.
Let's step into the first section then, the shifting sands, the atheist critique of objective morality. Our source material actually opens with a poem.
Yeah, the moral compass.
Right. It paints this picture of conscience's deep wellspring. It has this line, "From conscience's deep wellspring, where duty's summons gleams, we sense a guiding power beyond our earthly dreams." The author is setting the stage here for the concept of objective moral values.
Which we need to define clearly before we go any further, because people throw around the word objective a lot in casual conversation, and they often misuse it. What exactly do we mean by objective moral values?
The best way to understand it is to contrast it with subjective preference.
Right.
If I say chocolate ice cream is the best, that is subjective. It describes me. It doesn't describe the ice cream. It's true for me, but it doesn't have to be true for you. You might hate chocolate. You might be a strict vanilla person. Neither of us is factually wrong.
Exactly. I can't look at you and say, you are factually incorrect for disliking chocolate. I mean, I could say you have terrible taste.
Which I don't.
But that's a joke, not a statement of fact. But I say torturing innocent children for fun is wrong.
That feels entirely different. That carries weight.
It feels fundamentally different. If you say that, you don't mean, I personally have a distaste for torturing children, but hey, if that's your hobby, you do you.
No, I mean, it is wrong for me. It's wrong for you. It's wrong for a Viking in the year 800, and it's wrong for a futuristic astronaut on Mars.
Exactly. You are claiming that the wrongness is a property of the act itself, not just a description of your internal feelings. That is what an objective moral value is. It exists independently of human opinion.
The source references C.S. Lewis here, The Law of Human Nature.
Yes, Lewis had this brilliant observation. He said, don't look at what people say about their philosophy. Just listen to them arguing. Listen to two people fighting in a grocery store queue or kids on a playground. They say things like, that's not fair, or you promised, or I was here first.
They appeal to a standard.
They do. They aren't just expressing blind rage. They are appealing to a shared rulebook of fair play that they assume the other person knows and accepts. Lewis argues that the very fact that we quarrel, that we try to prove the other person is in the wrong, implies we both think there is a real right and wrong to measure our actions against. If there was no standard, we would just fight like animals over a piece of meat. But we wouldn't argue about fairness.
But here comes the skeptic. The skeptic looks at that argument, look at the vast sweep of human history, and just laughs. They say, rule book. What rule book? Because if you look at the human record, that rule book seems to have a lot of wildly different editions.
And this is the challenge of cultural relativism. The source brings this up specifically. It talks about the shifting tide of values. You can almost hear the muffled voices of history contradicting each other.
Let's look at the evidence for that. Slavery is the big one. For thousands of years, across almost every major civilization, Greek, Roman, Persian, Egyptian slavery was just normal. It was the absolute economic engine of the world. Aristotle defended it philosophically. Now we look at it with horror. We condemn it as a righteous pain, as the poem says.
Or look at pillaging. If you were a Norse Viking, raiding a coastal village wasn't a crime. It wasn't seen as evil. It was a career path. It was how you proved your valor and provided for your kin. Or look at how different cultures throughout history treat the elderly or children, or what they consider appropriate punishment for crimes.
So the argument goes, if morality changes that much across time and borders, isn't it just a human construct? If the Vikings thought pillaging was noble, and we think it's a war crime, who is to say we are right and they are wrong? Maybe it's all just cultural fashion, morality as a trend, like wearing bell-bottoms.
It's a really strong argument on the surface. It suggests that morality is just shorthand for what we do around here. And if you take that line of thinking to its logical conclusion, you end up in a really scary place. Individual relativism.
So go through that, because I think people flirt with relativism in college dorm rooms until they realize what it actually costs in the real world.
Well, if X is good just means my culture approves of X, then you lose the ability to criticize any other culture, period. You can't criticize the Nazis. You can't criticize a totalitarian regime that oppresses women. You just have to shrug your shoulders and say, well, that's just their culture. Who am I to judge?
And if you take it down to the individual level,
then X is good literally just means I like X.
Which means if I like stealing your car, then for me, stealing your car is good, and you can't logically tell me I'm wrong. You can only tell me you don't prefer it.
Precisely. It reduces justice to preference. It makes universal human rights mathematically impossible to justify. If there is no objective standard above us, then human rights are just a polite fiction we tell ourselves to feel safe. They have no more fundamental reality than the rules of monopoly.
That's a bleak picture. It basically says that might makes a lot of it. Right, because there is no other higher court to appeal to. But the atheist critique doesn't stop at relativism. They actually have a much stronger card to play, science, specifically evolutionary biology. The source goes into this in a lot of detail. This is the whole is without the ought dilemma.
Right. This is the modern scientific explanation for morality. The argument is that we don't need God or a cosmic rulebook to explain why we are nice to each other. We just have Darwin.
The survival advantage.
Exactly. Think about human beings in the state of nature. We are physically pathetic. We don't have thick armor. We don't have venom. We don't have claws. We can't run very fast. Alone on the savannah, a human is just a snack for a leopard.
We absolutely need the pack.
We need the tribe. So evolution naturally selected for genes that encouraged cooperation. If I share my food with you today when you're hungry, you might share with me tomorrow when I'm starving. This is the concept of reciprocal altruism.
The classic, I scratch your back, you scratch mine.
Exactly. It is a biological transaction. Over millions of years, the tribes that cooperated survived and multiplied. The tribes that were entirely selfish and just killed each other over resources died out. So we are the descendants of the cooperators. We are the descendants of the nice people, not because niceness is somehow holy, but purely because niceness kept us alive.
So when I feel that powerful tug to save the drowning child from the pond, when I feel that deep empathy, the materialist is saying it's not a divine spark.
The materialist says absolutely not. It's your mirror neurons firing. Neuroscience shows we have these physical structures in our brains that allow us to simulate what other creatures are feeling. If I see you in physical pain, my brain actually lights up in its own pain centers. Empathy is just biological wiring. It's a chemical reaction designed to facilitate group survival.
So the skeptic says, look, we have a perfectly fine naturalistic explanation for the machinery of morality. We know how it developed. We can see it in brain scans. So why do we need a moral lawgiver? It feels like we've explained the ghost out of the machine.
It is a very compelling argument. It really gives people pause. I help you because it helps my genes. But the source text argues there is a critical flaw here, a massive missing piece that empirical science cannot bridge.
The gap between the how and the ought.
Yes. Evolutionary psychology does a fantastic job of explaining how we came to have these feelings. It explains the historical development of the behavior, but it completely fails to explain the moral obligation.
This is the so what factor.
Yeah.
Exactly. The so what. Let's go back to the drowning child. But let's raise the stakes to make the philosophy clear. Let's make it darker. Imagine you are in a situation where doing the wrong thing guarantees your survival, and doing the right thing guarantees your death.
Okay, like, say, hiding a fugitive from a totalitarian regime. The secret police come to your door. Are there dissidents in your attic?
That is the perfect example. If you hide them and lie to the police, you risk being discovered and shot. You and your entire family. Your genes perish. If you turn them in, you might get a cash reward. You survive. You reproduce.
From a purely evolutionary standpoint, like strict, unfeeling Darwinism, hiding them is stupid.
It is a genetic error. It is a malfunction of your survival instinct. If morality is truly just a survival hack, then in the exact moment where being moral gets you killed, the hack has failed its evolutionary purpose. You should logically discard it. You should turn the dissidents in.
That is a really heavy realization. If it's all just about passing on genes, then self-sacrifice isn't beautiful. It's actually a pathology. It's a bug in our biological code. And yet, and here's the kicker that the source points out, we regard the person who dies to save others as the ultimate hero. We build statues of them. We tell stories about them for centuries. We place the highest possible value on the action that completely defies our evolutionary programming.
Why do we do that?
Source argues that this ought, this unshakable, heavy sense that we must do the right thing even if it completely destroys us, cannot come from a system designed purely for biological survival. Evolution can explain herd instinct. It cannot explain moral duty.
So we are stuck in a hard place. Relativism leads to a chaos where oppressive regimes can technically be right. Evolution explains the biological machinery of empathy, but can't tell us why we should obey it when it hurts us. But now the rationalist steps into the arena. Host B, the logical side of our brain, says, okay, you want to bring God into this to solve the problem? Let's see if your God can handle a logical trap.
Enter the Euthyphro Dilemma.
I love this part of the deep dive because it feels like a chess move. It comes from Plato. Socrates is talking to this guy, Euthyphro, and he asks a deceptively simple question. Is something good because God commands it? Or does God command it because it is good?
It looks so innocent on the page, doesn't it? It looks like a semantic game, just wordplay. But it is a fork in the road, and both paths lead straight off a cliff.
Let's walk down that first path. Horn number 1 of the dilemma, divine command theory. Something is good only because God commands it.
Okay, let's play that logical path out. If good is just a label we stick on what God wants, then morality is entirely arbitrary.
Arbitrary, meaning God could wake up tomorrow and decide that lying is a virtue.
Theoretically, yes. If God's raw will is the only definition of what is good, then if God commanded cruelty, cruelty would be functionally good. If God commanded us to hate our neighbors, hatred would suddenly be the ultimate virtue.
And that is terrifying to most people. It means there is no underlying logic to the universe. It's just a list of capricious rules. Don't eat pork, don't kill, wear blue on Tuesdays. It makes God seem like a cosmic dictator, not a moral authority.
Yeah.
A dictator with a random number generator making up laws.
Exactly. It makes morality completely capricious. So most thoughtful religious people recoil from that first horn. They say, no, God would never command cruelty because God is inherently good.
Which pushes us right onto the second path. Horn number 2, moral realism. God commands it because it is inherently good.
And here is the trap springing shut. If God commands it because it is already good, that implies that goodness exists outside of God. It exists above him.
Oh, I see it. It's like there is a standard sum cosmic constitution of goodness, and God is just the enforcer of it.
Right. God is looking at this external standard of goodness and saying, okay, human beings, I've checked the standard and you should follow this. But if that standard exists independently, then God is philosophically superfluous. We don't actually need God to have objective morality. We just need to figure out the standard. God just becomes a cosmic middleman.
So the atheist says, checkmate. Either morality is arbitrary, which means your God isn't actually good, or morality is independent, which means your God isn't needed.
And honestly, this is where the conversation usually just stops. It's a standoff. The atheist says, see, your theology is fundamentally flawed. And the believer says, but I still feel this moral law in my bones. And they just talk past each other for hours. It's an intellectual stalemate.
But our source material, the Quranic moral argument, says there is a third option, a way to break the dilemma entirely, a way to escape Plato's trap.
This is where we transition to the bedrock, the Quranic resolution.
Let's really set the scene for this transition. We've been wandering in this desert of relativism, hearing the shifting sands of culture. We've been stuck in the cold logic trap of Euthyphro. Now we are listening for a different tone. The source approaches this resolution by first addressing the biological question, the is versus ought, and then tackling the logical dilemma. It starts with a very specific concept, the Fitrah.
Fitrah, yes. This is a massively critical term in Islamic theology. It basically translates to the primordial nature or the original disposition of the human being.
The source cites Surah 30, verse 30 here, the Fitrah of Allah upon which he has created the people. What does that actually mean for our argument about morality?
Think of it as the factory settings of the soul. The Quran is arguing that humans are not born as blank slates. We aren't just empty hard drives waiting for our culture or our parents to write moral code onto us. We are born with a deeply innate inclination.
An inclination toward what, exactly?
Toward truth, toward the oneness of the Creator, and toward virtue. The source argues that empathy and altruism, those exact things the evolutionary biologist dismisses as mere survival hacks, are actually the law of design.
So wait, let's parse that. How does this differ from the evolutionary view? Because both perspectives are saying we are physically wired for empathy.
The difference is teleology, purpose. Evolutionary biology says we have empathy because it's a random genetic mutation that just happened to work out for our survival. It's a lucky accident of history. If history had gone slightly differently, maybe we would be wired to eat our young and feel great about it.
Right. It's completely contingent on random chance.
The Quranic view says, no, empathy isn't an accident. It is the originated art. We were designed to have these specific feelings. We have a structural drive toward virtue. It completely reframes the biological evidence. Yes, we have mirror neurons. Yes, we have oxytocin flooding our brains when we hug someone. But those chemical reactions are just the hardware. The software, the Fitrah, was intentionally installed by a designer to guide us back to him.
That changes the I sought problem entirely. Because if I was designed to be moral, then being moral is fulfilling my core purpose. It's not just a survival hack. It's operating the machine the exact way it was built to be operated.
Right. It gives the ought a rock-solid foundation. You ought to be, just because that is what you fundamentally are. To be unjust is to violate your own structural nature. It's not just breaking an external rule, it's breaking yourself.
Okay, I really get the biological fix there. It injects purpose into the biological mechanism. But what about the logical trap? The Euthyphro Dilemma is still sitting right there on the table. Is goodness arbitrary or is it external to God?
The Quranic argument rejects the binary completely. It says, Plato, you're asking the wrong question.
How so?
The dilemma assumes that two things are entirely separate, God and goodness.
Yeah.
It asks, is goodness below God meaning arbitrary, or is goodness above God meaning independent? The Quranic answer is, goodness is of God.
Unity of essence.
Yes. The source explains that God is not separate from goodness. Goodness is not a list of rules external to God that he has to consult. God is the good.
Can you give me an analogy for that? Because
Wow.
this is getting into some really deep metaphysical waters.
Let's think of the sun and light. Does the sun decide to make light? Like, does it wake up in the morning, weigh its options, and say, I think I'll shine today?
No. It shines because it is the sun. That is its intrinsic nature.
Right. And is the light independent of the sun? Can you have a jar of sunlight without the sun existing?
No. The light requires the source.
That's the analogy. The light emanates from the sun because of what the sun fundamentally is. God commands justice not because he decided on a random whim and not because he found a rule book of justice floating in space. He commands justice because he is the just. Al-Adl.
That helps a lot. It makes it click. So God doesn't decide that justice is good. And he isn't looking up the definition in some cosmic dictionary. He defines it simply by his existence.
Exactly. The source cites Surah 3, verse 18. Allah maintains creation in justice. Justice is an inherent, inseparable attribute of the Creator. Therefore, his commands are the logic of creation. They aren't arbitrary whims. They are the fundamental structure of reality. You can almost think of it as a crystalline tone of pure, unbroken logic that vibrates through everything.
The logic of creation, that connects perfectly back to the title of our deep dive, the architecture of the soul.
It really does. If God created the universe with a specific nature, the Fitrah, the balance, the inherent justice, then morality is literally the blueprint for how that universe operates.
So, to finally answer Euthyphro, goodness isn't arbitrary because it is grounded in God's immutable nature. And it isn't superfluous because without God, there is no nature to ground it in.
Precisely. It anchors objective morality in the only place it logically can be anchored, a necessary, eternal being. Without that transcendent anchor, you drift right back into the shifting sands of relativism.
Okay, this is all very high-level philosophy. It's beautiful and it's logically tight, but it is abstract. I want to bring it down to the ground. Let's make it tangible. What does architectural justice look like in real life? If I walk out of my house today, how does this actually change how I act?
The source material moves to the functional application right here. It points to specific verses that lay out this universal standard. Surah 16, verse 90 is a major one.
Indeed, Allah orders justice and the doing of good.
The very comprehensive verse, when you break it down, it lists three explicit things to do. Justice, which is adl, goodness, which is ihsan, and giving to relatives. And it lists three things to actively avoid: shameful deeds, injustice, and rebellion.
The source emphasizes that these are presented as objective imperatives.
Yes, the text doesn't say Allah suggests you try to be nice if it happens to fit your local culture. It says Allah orders. These are immutable laws. And interestingly, the verse ends by saying, he instructs you that you may be reminded.
Reminded. That goes right back to the Fitrah, doesn't it?
Correct. The Quran repeatedly describes itself as a reminder. A gikif. It isn't teaching you something utterly alien to your nature. It is reminding you of what is already written on your heart, what is already programmed into your factory settings, but has perhaps been covered up by cultural conditioning or personal ego.
That is a really powerful idea, that true morality is an act of remembering. It's almost Platonic in a way, but with a firm theological anchor.
And then there is the detailed definition of righteousness in Surah 2, verse 177. This really breaks down the holistic nature of this architecture.
The source calls this holistic righteousness. It starts by saying, righteousness is not that you turn your faces toward the east or the west.
That is a direct critique of empty ritual. At the time of the revelation, the direction of formal prayer changed from Jerusalem to Mecca, and it caused a huge debate among the people. The Quran is stepping in and saying, look, facing the right way physically is entirely pointless if you don't have the internal moral architecture to back it up. You can maximize your ritual compliance and completely minimize your humanity, and if you do that, you've missed the entire point of religion.
So what is the internal architecture it demands?
It lists the vital components: faith in the unseen God, the angels, the books, plus active justice. And the examples of active justice are extremely specific. Giving wealth, despite your deep love for it, to relatives, to orphans, to the needy, to the traveler, and for the freeing of slaves.
Despite your love for it. I love that phrase. That completely acknowledges the human struggle. We love our money, We love our comfort and security. Evolution tells us to hoard those resources to protect our genes. The architecture of the soul demands that we go actively against that survival instinct for a much higher purpose.
And you really have to notice the inclusion of the phrase freeing of slaves. This circles all the way back to address the cultural relativism argument we started with.
Right, because the modern atheist will often point to ancient texts and say, hey, your holy book was written in a time of widespread slavery, so it implicitly condones it.
But look closely at the text. While human cultures worldwide normalize slavery as an economic bedrock, the Quranic imperative identified it as a degraded state that desperately needed to be rectified. It listed the freeing of human beings as one of the very highest acts of righteousness, as a literal path to spiritual salvation. It establishes a moral trajectory toward human dignity that completely transcends the cultural norms of the 7th century.
The source argues this is a holistic commitment. It's not just about being privately spiritual in your room. It is about washing away the actual stain of injustice in society.
And this brings us to the critique of the social contract. The Enlightenment idea from thinkers like Hobbes and Rousseau that we're just moral because we signed a hypothetical agreement to be nice to each other so we don't get hurt.
The ultimate, don't hit me and I won't hit you treaty.
Exactly. But the source argues the social contract utterly fails the ought test. A contract is just a negotiated truce between self-interested parties. If I am powerful enough to break the truce and get away with it, the contract just dissolves. It has no binding power.
Right. If I'm a ruthless dictator or, say, a billionaire who can just buy the legal system, why should I care about the social contract? I can afford to break it. The consequences don't apply to me.
Exactly. Without a transcendent anchor, justice is just the will of the majority, or worse, the will of the most powerful person in the room. It's just might makes right dressed up in a nice tailored suit.
But with the anchor.
With the anchor, justice is a structural truth. It applies to the billionaire and the beggar equally. It is the functional architecture required for the human spirit to operate correctly. You can't cheat it because you can't cheat the design of your own soul.
Let's try to synthesize all of this. We've covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with a foundational question. Is morality just a biological hack? Is it just neurons firing to keep us alive?
We walked through the desert of relativism, where values shift like sand and, terrifyingly, oppressors could theoretically be considered right. We faced the Euthyphro Dilemma, that rigid logical trap that usually silences religious morality.
And we arrived at the Quranic resolution, the Fitrah. The profound idea that morality is the law of design etched right into us.
And that God's command is not arbitrary, but the pure expression of ultimate reality.
The source uses this analogy of the blueprint at the end. I think that's the ultimate takeaway here. We don't obey gravity because we like it. We respect it because it is the fundamental nature of physical reality. If you ignore gravity and step off a roof, you fall.
And the source argues morality is exactly the same, just in the spiritual realm. It is not a list of do's and don'ts designed to annoy us or limit our fun. It is the alignment of the human instrument with the law of creation. When you act with justice, you are aligned with the cosmos. When you act with injustice, you are creating massive friction against the very fabric of existence.
That is such a massive shift in perspective. It turns morality from a heavy burden into an absolute necessity. It's not about being good so you get a reward at the end of the day. It's about being good so you don't literally break.
It makes it entirely functional.
So here is the final provocation for you, the listener. We talked about the drowning child at the beginning. We talked about the physical feeling of guilt. If your moral compass is indeed a structural drive from a divine source, if it is your factory setting, what happens to the architecture of your soul when you consistently act against it?
That really is the question. Is that gnawing feeling of guilt just a malfunction of your neurons? Or is it a structural stress fracture?
If you build a physical building and you stubbornly ignore the architect's blueprint, eventually the support beams crack under the pressure. Maybe the human soul is no different. Maybe the guilt you feel isn't just an emotion. Maybe it's the sound of the foundation shifting.
It's a heavy thought. Something definitely worth holding on to.
Thanks for diving deep with us.